Welcome, messengers. We're here today in the virtual video studio, and today we're doing a messenger spotlight with Adam Shaw, also known as the Heart Guy. So I have him here with me. Adam Shaw, would you tell us a little bit about yourself and what your message is?
Certainly will, Matt. Well, a little bit about me. I've spent pretty much my whole life in the field of health and well-being. My parents were both psychiatric nurses, so we lived where they worked, within the grounds of a psychiatric hospital. So I've been surrounded by people with mental health issues for the first 17 years of my life. And then I went into medical field and became a nurse myself. That was just over 20 years ago. And I've been through the medical field. I've worked on 3 different continents as a nurse. And I've been fascinated with the field of heart health. And then I had a personal experience working with Reiki that completely shifted my awareness of what actually caused it and what really was the psychology behind heart disease. And in the end, I left the health service because I was feeling lack of resonance with using drugs to get results for people. And then I work as the heart guy, working on people's more mental side, the spiritual, the physical, the mental, and the emotional aspects of heart disease.
So when you're working with somebody, can you walk us through what that process looks like? Is it one-on-one? Do you teach group classes? And what would a typical session look like if I were to work with you?
Well, for people that work one-on-one, I get them through a heart MOT service. And the MOT is like a car test over here. So what that involves is I take people through the 4 areas of their life. It's a very detailed questionnaire. So it looks at deeper rooted things that I've found to be very relevant with people that have heart attacks. And so we will look at diet and exercise. That's just the tip of the iceberg. That's what the main bodies over here and in America will tell people to focus on. What I've found ultimately, it's people's relationship with themselves that's the most important thing. And if we don't get our relationship with ourselves right, then that will manifest slowly into other aspects of our life. And from the bottom of the tree up, that manifests into family relationships. People who have something wrong with the relationship with themselves will start to find fault, usually in their close family. And that's pretty much most of us. So our close family will suffer, then our relationships, our personal relationships will suffer. Then that will manifest. We might get jobs that we're not happy in. And so this daily stress of not loving ourselves, not loving our life, not valuing ourselves enough to then look after ourselves. Because if we end up in relationships that aren't happy and jobs that aren't happy, we start developing habits. Like we put weight on, we get hypertension, we start smoking, we start drinking more, we choose unhealthy dietary habits. So the dietary health and the emotional side, that most people address is like pruning the top of the tree. What I do is work with people at the lower levels, at the more base levels. We address everything. But what I hope to do is to go with people to find out what the real issues are, right at the root of the cause. And when we can unlock that, everything else just blossoms.
So it sounds to me like typically somebody may come to you looking for the wisdom and such that you've learned in terms of heart disease and living a healthier, happier life, hopefully free from heart disease. But it sounds like they're getting even more than that with what you're sharing. Like you're really getting an in-depth emotional, psychological, and physical transformation and spiritual as well. Is that correct? I mean, this sounds like a much more in-depth process than just, learning a couple of facts about how to have a healthier, happier heart.
Yeah. Well, obviously, and that's a really good question, Matt. Obviously, I'll take everybody at the place that they're at. I'm not going to start talking about deep psychological issues. If somebody just comes to me looking to lose weight, we'll address the weight issues. And what I've found with most approaches, certainly to weight loss, for example, is certain foods are demonized, certain habits are demonized. And I worked in a fat camp in America, and I witnessed this process of working with overweight children. they were told during the camp process that they couldn't eat chocolate and they couldn't eat French fries. So what they did was demonize certain foods. So what used to happen in the camp was kids used to lose weight, but then when they got out of the camp and started eating chocolates and French fries, then they used to think, oh, well, I've obviously gone off the wagon here. And then their habits would go back to the way they were before. They'd put the weight on and they'd come back the next year more overweight than they were the year before. And looking after kids that had been going through that system, some for over 10 years, really nailed that home to me, that when guilt is involved, everything falls apart. So I take guilt out of the equation, I take judgment out of the equation, and make everything okay. And that's the point that we start from.
Wow. I know a lot of people that would be really happy to hear that. That is fantastic and really, really freeing as well. Earlier in this interview, you shared a little bit about your story. I'm wondering, will you go back to that and go a little bit more in depth? What was, if you don't mind sharing, what was your actual experience, your heart attack, and why was that such a powerful thing that led you to want to do this with your life?
Well, the interesting thing, Matt, it wasn't actually a heart attack I had. It was an experience when I was working in a coronary care unit. And this was in the UK. And what had happened is I'd been working in that environment, working in medical wards, working in coronary care. And what I found was that I worked with a lot of people who had terminal illness at the end of their lives. And what used to happen was the doctors would walk in the ward, they'd tell the patient, I'm sorry, you've got cancer, you'll be dead within 3 weeks. And then they would walk out of the ward. And there was a certain coldness to it, because that's how the doctors were taught. They had to deal with it. They had to get in, they had to deliver the information, and they had to get out. And my role as a nurse was to counsel people. And when they were looking me in the eye and saying, Adam, is there anything I can do? You know, is there any hope here? What I found was it was stealing a piece of my soul to not be able to give somebody at least some hope at the end of their lives. And then my granddad got cancer. And I thought, I know what the medical system has in store for them. And I have to do something, because it was just so deeply personal. I was very, very close to my granddad. And I'd watched my granny die of cancer. And seeing the slowness and the painfulness of that process was really motivating to me. So I started to open up my mind to alternative points of view. And I'd heard about this thing called Reiki. And so I thought, right, that's it. It's people had told me it was a universal life force energy. And I had no idea what that meant. I was medically trained. I'd grown up in a psychiatric institution. Everything was about diagnose, medicate, watch the results. So this concept of going on a weekend and finding this healing system that was going to be good for everyone was quite incredible to me. And I went to this weekend, and to cut the long story short, I fell out with my Reiki master. I thought, this is complete nonsense. They were talking about things like chakras and auras and speaking to spirit guides. Now, I was medically trained, and this stuff was just way too much for me going along. I thought, it's about energy, surely, not about fruitcakes. I'd grown up in a psychiatric environment, so I was thinking I'd been readmitted or something like that. I couldn't get my head around what was going on in this Reiki weekend. And we did Reiki 1 and 2 in the weekend. And a lot of people told me, you know, that's too much. Well, obviously we get what we need. And I was never going to use Reiki. I left there. I'd fallen out with my Reiki master. He banned me from asking questions because I asked too many. And he said, we'll never get through the content of the course if you keep asking questions. So I was angry. I'd reached the end of my tether at the end of that. And that was the Saturday and Sunday. On the Monday, I was sitting at home and I had a letter through the door from a company I'd had no dealings with for 12 months, who I'd bought a video camera. They'd overcharged me. I thought they'd overcharged me, but we'd drawn the line on the case, and it was case closed and had been for 12 months. They gave me a check for the exact amount that I paid for the Reiki course. And even with my cynical Western brain, I thought, maybe this is a sign. The guy had said, you know, work on yourself, work with energy on yourself. And that's what I did. I thought, you know, I was physically fit. I was a fitness instructor. I was in physically fabulous shape. I mean, the best shape of my life. I was exercising 6 times a week, you know, probably strenuous physical exercise for about 10 hours a week, every week. And I was in peak physical condition. But what happened as I worked on myself is I started to develop a chest pain. Now, I was working in a coronary care unit and I knew the symptoms of angina and heart disease. And yet this was a dull ache. And every time I did energy work on it, the pain got worse. It got heavier and heavier and heavier. And there was part of me saying to myself what I've been taught, that a universal life force energy of Reiki can only do good. So although I didn't logically understand why I was getting more pain each time I healed myself, I did learn to trust the process. And that manifested into a state after 6 weeks where I was in so much pain that driving my car and doing that with a steering wheel was creating so much discomfort. I thought it was actually dangerous for me to drive. I was feeling emotional at the smallest amount of things. And we learned to hold in our emotions. Our family weren't expressive emotionally. You know, all my life through nursing, through watching people die, I was always able to keep my emotions in check, but they were all over the place after this experience working with Reiki. And I cancelled all my shifts. I went home. I worked on myself for another 3 days. And I was sitting in the bath one day doing healing. And suddenly I had this cathartic moment. And I'd watched people, I'd listened to people who'd been clinically dead that we'd resuscitated and brought them back, who'd explained this experience of having their life flash before them. And I could never quite understand it. And then it happened to me. And in this moment, I realized that although I was physically fit, that psychologically, I was literally catapulting myself towards all of the symptoms of a heart attack because I never told anybody in my life how much I loved them. Something as simple and obvious as that. And with all of this pain in my heart and all these tears rolling down my face, I ran down the stairs and I went to my mum. And me and my mum had a really difficult relationship, really tense, a lot of issues between us. And I sat down with my mum and I said, look, mum, I know we've had our issues. I know that we're not always close, but I need you to know this, whatever happens between us, I'll always love you. And my mum around to me and said, she said, that's great, Adam. What drugs are you taking at the moment? So I had to work through this sort of awkwardness, but we got through it. I was able to give my mum a hug, and from a family that never hug each other, you know, probably been best part of 15 years since I hugged my mum. And it was just such a huge breakthrough. And I felt some of the pain get less. So I went to my dad and had the same process. I was like, Dad, look, I know we've had our differences, but I really love you. And it was the same way. He says, son, what drugs are you taking? So I had to get through that as well. And the bottom line is, I went around all of my close friends and family telling them I loved them, including my granddad who was dying. And even though that wasn't enough to save him, it made his death easier for me because I knew that I'd said the things that I'd never been able to say to my granny, the stuff that was eating away inside me, that I was able to tell him that I loved him before he died. And it just made his passing so much more peaceful for me. Whereas the rest of the family were sort of suffering because they hadn't had that shift, that awareness. And through that, I was then able to go back to the coronary care ward and work with people. And when they said, what caused my heart attack? I stopped saying, you know, are you overweight? Have you got a family history of it? Do you smoke? Have you got hypertension? Which was what we were taught. And I started saying, well, you know, do you love yourself? Can you look in the mirror and love the person looking back at you? You know, what's your relationship with the closest people in your life? And through that, I was able to unlock patterns, working with people individually, that really gave me a breakthrough, and all of the people that I worked with from that point.
You know, You pretty much, I don't know where to go from there. I mean, you've pretty much just summed up the importance of what you're doing right there so beautifully and so powerfully. That's that to me says it all. Thank you for sharing that story, Adam. That is really, really powerful. Uh,
You're welcome. Thanks,
yeah.
Matt.
So let's see. We've got a couple minutes left here. I want to make sure that we get to your website. As I understand, you have a website here, and let's go over that and take a look at that. So,
Okay, thank you.
what are we looking at the home page and blog and such? Is there anywhere in particular you want me to go on this site?
Well, the main thing I want people to see on this site is the home page, because what it is an invitation. I've seen enough people die. I mean, I know a lot of people have motivation and there's a monetary aspect. When I set this website out, it was never for the money. It never has been. It will have to be at some stage, but my motivation was purely about keeping people alive and educating them, giving people a real education about what's important, what are the real symptoms of heart disease, what are the daily things that we can do. I've interviewed experts in the field. I've got so much content there that there's a series of videos. If people leave their name and email, that they'll get this content that could literally save your life, and if not your life, the lives of someone that you love, because there's very easily implementable steps. It's not all about the profound stuff either. It's got some very simple and powerful steps. Things like hydration. Most of the population is dehydrated, and there's been a proven link between dehydration and illness. So it's simple things that people can do. It's not just all of the emotional stuff that I've talked about on this video. There's really simple, easy to implement tips that can build you up at whatever place you're at and give you some real easy things that you can do to reduce your risk of a heart attack.
Now, we had talked a little bit before this interview about an ebook. Is that on here, or can you tell us about that and where people can go to find it?
It will be on there, Matt, by the time this interview goes
Okay,
out. I
wonderful.
mean, I've got a page, I just haven't
Yeah.
linked it to the website yet, so that will be on there. That's Increase Your Heart Health Easily, and that is the the ebook supplement to the bigger package that I've put together, which is the Active Energy
Mm.
System. And the Active Energy System is my experience of working with energy medicine, working with Reiki, working with energetic NLP, working with hypnosis, working with vortex healing. And what I found as a practitioner, I learned these disciplines and I weren't using them. So what I did, I thought, well, I walk a lot. What if I reminded myself to work on my energy field when I walked? And it was a set of audio downloads that I could take with me that reminded me to work on my own energy system, even if I was working to and from meetings. So any time I go walking now, I can work on my energy field. And that's what the Active Energy System's all about. It's all of my training brought into a package of personal development, energy medicine, and common sense health tips, all brought into something that we can do even as we walk around the house. So that's the system that I'd really like to point people in the direction of.
That's fantastic. If somebody wants a more in-depth personal connection with you specifically and what you teach, how would they go about contacting you and getting in touch with you?
Oh, thank you for that question, Matt. Well, there's a contact page on my website, of course, and that goes straight into my inbox. I'm not sure for how much longer, but at the moment it does. And at the moment, I'm still doing one-on-one consultations, but I'm moving very much into the group realm because I find working with group energies is far more appealing. So at the moment, for the short term, there is the possibility of working one-on-one with me, but where I'm moving towards is building up a community, a group, because what I've found is the missing link in health is accountability. And so what I like to do is just put people in groups together to keep that group energy high, even when they're not doing the one-on-one with me, because we've all been in that position. It's great when you're talking to your coach or your mentor or your GP or whatever. You're full of motivation, but what about those moments in between the sessions where you're feeling a little bit low, you wake up, you don't want to get out of bed, well, the community is designed for that.
That's really, really fantastic. Thank you. Thank you, Adam, for this very, very powerful interview and what you're sharing with the world in your message. And I'm grateful I had a chance to talk to you today. And is there anything else you'd like to say before we end?
Well, I'd just like to say hello to all of my friends over in America. It's a pleasure to connect with you. It's a very small island here on the UK. And one other thing I'd like to say about working with me is, it maybe hasn't come across on the interview, is when you get to know me, you realize that one of the biggest things about me is I think humor and health are very much interconnected. And you'll find I'm a little bit quirkier than most people out there, because if you can't laugh at yourself, if you don't learn to laugh at yourself, then you really are missing out on probably one of the biggest tools in medicine and self-help.
Admirable quality and wise truth there, I think, Adam. Thank you. Thank you for being on our Spotlight interview. And we look forward to actually seeing you at the summit and your future work. So, thank you.
It's a pleasure. Thanks, Matt.
Thank you for joining us today on the Messenger Spotlight, and we look forward to seeing you for our next interview.